Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bravo 22 Live and our YouTube channel, made possible by the Royal British Legion and the Drive Project. My name's Sharon. I've been with Bravo 22 since 2016, when I was involved with the theatre project at Newcastle. And since then, I've taken part in some awesome art projects, such as lino cutting and painting. Bravo 22 is an excellent project offering art for veterans and their families in your homes. Top artists share their insights across a huge range of creative ideas. So, if you're enjoying these workshops, there'll be lots more to come over the next few weeks, so keep an eye out and tell your military friends and family. Bravo 22 Live. You can subscribe to the channel and like and share us on Facebook. Don't forget to ask questions during the session and we'll respond to as many as we can. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very talented Al Johnson, who's going to talk about the artist L.S. Lowry. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Lovely beginning. As you know, this is the Masterpiece series, and we've been talking about all different kinds of masterpieces that you've chosen. I chose the first one, and then you've been choosing them since. And actually, this artist was chosen by Sharon. She's didn't choose a particular painting, but she likes the work of Lowry, I think. Is that right, Sharon? Tell us why you chose Lowry.
I like Lowry because he puts a lot of detail in his work, and he captures history of urban life in the mid-20th century. And it reminds me of when I was little in the 60s, when everybody was going to ICI, thousands of people walking to work.
Yeah, that's so interesting because actually Lowry, he decided he would paint the industrial scene. He said, my ambition was to put the industrial scene on the map. And I think he researched this, and he felt that nobody else was doing this, that no other artists were painting these scenes that he was so familiar with. He came from painted mostly the Salford area, and he paints these scenes that have become incredibly familiar to us as Lowry painted. They're very particular. People kind of instantly recognise a Lowry painting. So the one I've chosen is Going to Work, painted in 1943, so painted during the war. We can have a look at image 1. We can see the painting. And it's a crowd of people sort of rushing to work. And this is something, Sharon, that you said you remember, people kind of rushing to the same entrance going into work. This is during the war, and we can tell that it's during the war because there's a barrage balloon up in the sky there. There's a chimney belching smoke at the top, and then the buildings of the factory, and the factory is Mather and Platt, which was in Newton Heath. And it's only quite recently gone out of business, actually, the factory. They manufactured dynamos, electric dynamos, and they were originally designed by Thomas Edison. And then they bought the rights to manufacture them, and it became known actually as the Manchester Dynamo. But by the time of the war, the company was also manufacturing pumps, and they were being used in mills and collieries and power stations. And of course, during the war, they were used in the war effort. Some of them were even shipped out to the Soviet Union. So big factory, lots and lots of people work there, and they're flooding towards the gate. And you can see in the image 1 this sense of a flow of people, almost like they're being sucked in, a sort of being magnetized and pulled into the factory. And I imagine there was a clocking in system, may have been sirens to get people into work on time, and a lot of people in the area. And it's sort of over towards Salford. In the area, probably a lot of people worked in the factory, so they would all have shared. People would have shared this kind of connection with the factory. Now, for a long time, people thought this was a snowy scene. And actually, you can see why, because it's the foreground is white. The people are all seem to be treading on white ground, and the sky is very white. But actually, Lowry said it wasn't that. It was an industrial haze, a sort of, because of the smoke that was pouring out the chimneys in the factories. There was this sort of mist almost in the air all the time. Now, the workers that are kind of flowing into the factory were very often referred to as being matchstick men. And there was even a song about Lowry's pop song about Lowry's matchstick men, because he didn't really emphasise lots of details. And Sharon, you said right at the beginning, you felt it was the detail that you liked, wasn't it? But if in a way the people are not detailed, there is a sense of detail because these are complex images, but it's not really quite clear what the detail, how it is detailed. If we look at image 2, this is a different painting, and he did this a bit later. This is Landscape with Figures in 1957. So about 10, 15 years later. And this is 3 figures with a fence behind and a little dog. And the dog actually is a typical Lowry dog, very, very straight-legged and skinny. But what's interesting about these 3 people is that you have such a strong sense of characteristics. You can see what kind of people they are. You can see the tall man is rather surprised by Lowry standing there drawing him. And the woman in between, there seems to be some sort of relation. You can kind of discuss what that relationship is between them. There's a very hunched little man with a big cap. And the woman in the blue jacket is looking away, and whilst the startled man is looking towards her. So you have this very strong sense of the characteristics of the 3 people. Even though you can't really, when you look at it, it's not really detailed. You have a sense of detail, a sense of intensity, but not really because of detail. Very interesting. If we go back to image 1, and maybe we can zoom in, if possible, onto a crowd of the figures. You can see again in this main painting, Going to Work, the figures are not particularly detailed. In fact, the factory is more detailed than the figures. But you do have a strong sense of community and of humanity because of this sort of surge towards the factory gates. Very interesting. Sharon, have you seen any Lowry paintings?
Yeah. In 1976, after he died, they did a tour around Britain, and I saw him in Middlesbrough, and I saw quite a lot of his paintings. So, and I got this nice little program, and it has a lot of these pictures in.
And you've kept the catalogues ever since?
Yeah, it's my pride and joy.
Is it? Oh, that's so nice.
So yeah, very good. Thanks.
The painting we're looking at actually is in the collection of the Imperial War Museum in Salford. Right. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. They collected quite a lot of paintings during the war. Would you see if we've got any questions, Sharon? Have we got any questions coming in or shout outs?
Yeah, we've been really busy. So we've got a shout out for Paul, John, David, Colin, Steve, Shirley, Ian, and Sally Ann. And we've got lots and lots of questions too. So from Jack, he wanted to know, was Lowry married with family?
No, he didn't marry. He was rather harried by his mother. And actually he wasn't successful as a painter till after his mother died, and then he got his first his first big exhibition in London, he I think he had to kind of really stand up for himself, because his mother, he stood up for himself quite quietly, I think, but his mother was not impressed by him being a painter, I think. So he painted at night. In fact, he worked as a rent collector all his life. He wasn't ever a full-time painter, and it's kind of been a problem for him in a way, because he wasn't taken seriously until quite much, a long time after his death, actually, because he didn't do this full time. Sorry, I've strayed rather from the question. Any more questions, Sharon?
Yeah, Sally wants to know if Lowry's work was appreciated during his lifetime.
Well, it was. I mean, it depends what you mean by appreciation. So critically, so the critics and gallery owners and major collections, no, it wasn't appreciated at all. And this idea that he was a Sunday painter, that he wasn't really serious, that he wasn't painting in a serious way, that was very commonly held as a view by the art world, by the collectors, the curators. He didn't actually have any major exhibitions. The Tate, for example, owned 20 of his paintings and never showed them until comparatively recently. There was a big exhibition a couple of years ago. But in terms of the public, he was very widely appreciated. His paintings were very sought after, and his later exhibitions would be sold out. So it depends what side of the fence you're coming from, really. If you think the public vote is more important than the vote of owners and collectors, then he was successful. Anything else?
Yeah, Phil would like to know if all his pictures had matchstick people.
No, they don't. In fact, this is really a fairly short period in his life as an artist. So he doesn't start painting until he's sort of well into his 40s, or doesn't start painting seriously. And then his later paintings actually are quite unpeopled. He paints really interesting landscapes, some seascapes. In the Lowery, in Salford, in the Lowry Centre, where there's a big permanent exhibition of his work, I was very taken with the late seascapes, which are just silent seas. There's no people at all in them. But this was a period, I think it was part of his wanting to document this sort of the industrial landscape, as he said. Okay, well, let's have a look at another painting. There's one I just want to look at briefly, image 3, which is the Ironworks of 1941. And this is a painting which is much more about the landscape than about the people. So there are people in it, but they're much smaller. And I think you can see from this that it's his industry itself, the kind of excitement of the fiery chimneys and the factory buildings, the kind of, I think that almost the sort of random nature of the factories, that they're all kind of pushed together and really, that as a new building is needed, it's added on, and there's no sort of sense of planning. And I think probably he really liked that. He seems to have liked the kind of random nature of architecture. This painting is really interesting in terms of his colours. He used only 5 colours. Those of you who are painters will probably find this interesting. His colours were flake white, ivory black, vermilion, which is a sort of a red, but not a pink red, a sort of strong kind of scarlet red, Prussian blue, which is a dark blue, and yellow ochre. And those were his only colours. So in fact, he's using red, white and blue, black and white. which is a kind of standard, but they're very particular colours. And in this painting, you can see the use of vermilion, of that Prussian blue, at this sort of watery areas. Quite so a limited palette, which he felt suited these industrial areas. He said, "You don't need brains to be a painter, just feelings," which is a very interesting idea, that painting is not about thinking, but about feeling. Lowry's an interesting man, actually, because there's almost as much interest in him as a person as there is in the paintings, or maybe the two go hand in hand. If we look at image 4, it's a picture of Lowry in his studio. He used to paint in the attic, I think, originally when his mother was alive, and then he sort of gravitated to the back room. And he's completely surrounded by paintings. And you can't see it terribly well in this picture, but in lots of the photographs of him at this period, he's wearing the complete suit and tie. He's very smart, but his suit is completely covered in paint. So he's got his painting suit. Most of us would probably wear an apron, but he's got the painting suit. So he looks very smart, but paint spattered. He worked in the same house, stayed in the same house, and for most of his life, and painted in the same space. As I said, he later painted these sort of unpopulated landscapes. He also painted portraits. If we have a look at image 5, this is one of his portraits. This is a woman standing. This is later. This is 1965. Very beautiful portrait. I mean, very undetailed, a lack of detail rather. Very thick paint, very impasto paint, but a very strong sense of personality, which is interesting given the simplicity of the image. Now I've put on the links to this, so you'll see them on the YouTube link. Links to 2 documentaries about Lowry. One of them is from the 1957, I think, so it's black and white, but it's a wonderful film of him talking in the streets to children and just going about his day drawing. As I said, he continued to be working, but he drew all the time. So he was, he'd be going out and making drawings on little scraps of paper, and he's always got a little tiny book in his pocket. During the Blitz, if we go back to our main image again, image 1, during the Blitz, he made drawings during the day, and then he was a fire watcher at night, and so he was on the roofs of the Manchester stores, fire watching. Lots of his drawings and paintings depict Pendlebury, which was where he lived. He lived there for 40 years, and many of them are off Salford, the Salford streets. Okay, have we got any more questions come in?
Yes, we've been really busy. Ian would like to know, at what age did he start painting pictures as we know them today?
Well, I think he started, I actually can't remember what age he was precisely when he started, but he's quite a late starter. And he lived until into his 70s. No, longer than that, into his 80s. So he had a very long career, actually, even though he started later. He starts off with this idea about the industrial landscape. He was trained, actually. I mean, this is one of the things about the references to him being a Sunday painter, as if he wasn't trained and he didn't have any kind of background as a painter. He did. He trained for quite a long time as an artist, so he knew how to paint. He knew this. He had the skills. He I think wanted to paint to kind of create this almost like a history of industry. But I think once he felt he'd done that, there's a number of very strange drawings that were not even published in his lifetime, which he did much later in life, that are they're known as the marionette works. And he makes lots and lots of portraits. So there it is, quite a wide range of works. But the matchstick men, I mean, I shouldn't really say that because I think it's unfair to call them that. But the paintings known as the matchstick men paintings are by far the most famous. Anything else, Sharon?
Yeah, really interesting question from Sally Ann. She wonders what's going on in the minds of the people as they walk to work.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think one of the reasons that Lowry is such an interesting painter and so well liked is that we can always find ourselves in the painting. We can enter into it. We can become one of the people. We can imagine what that's like. If I was the woman in the red jacket going to work, what would I be thinking? Would I be thinking about what I've got for my lunch? A lot of them are carrying bags, aren't they, with their lunches? Would I be thinking, oh, another long day at the factory? Or would I be thinking, I'm going to see my mate and we can chat? And I do feel that he creates this sense of connection that we can enter into it. We can become one of the people in the painting. He was a very principled man. He's famous. One of the reasons he's famous is that he holds the record for rejecting the most number of British honours, including a knighthood in 1968. So he rejected 5 honours, 5 major honours. And I think he did that because he felt, he always talked about being ordinary, being just like everyone else, and that he had this skill for documenting, but he didn't feel that singled him out, so he didn't feel it was appropriate. Interesting, isn't it? I really like him for that he didn't accept the honours. And some of you have been doing our commission workshops where we've been thinking about the whole process of being commissioned. Normally with paintings, it's an individual that commissions you. It's somebody who wants, particularly I think for Lowry, somebody who wanted, perhaps people from Salford who wanted a picture of Salford on their walls, or people who thought they could imagine that things were changing and wanted a record of how it used to look. But actually this particular painting, Going to Work, was commissioned by the WAAC, which was the War Artists Advisory Committee. And that was set up by Kenneth Clark. And it was a sort of agency within the government. And the idea was to create a comprehensive record of public reaction to the war. And one of the most important things they felt that they needed to do was to document how the war was just for ordinary people, not the military, not people on the fronts, but people who were at home and having to cope with the Blitz and the privations of the war and the shortages and the fear. And so that's what they did. They set this organisation up. I mean, it's seems incredibly sort of enterprising. They commissioned nearly 6,000 works from 400 artists. So they had artists who were chosen to be the advisory committees. They were advisory committees' choices, and then some that artists who painted images that they thought were important to keep for the nation. About half of them are now in the collection of the Imperial War Museum, and so a lot of them are in Salford actually. And this painting is in Salford at the Imperial War Museum. And Manchester, of course, like lots of big cities, there were huge demands on the manufacturing industries, and factories had to go over to making materials that were important for the war effort. So there was a real huge demand. The curator at the Imperial War Museum says that a huge part of the population was engaged in industry, and the commissioning bodies were really keen to get artists to represent that. So that's why Lowry in particular was ideal, because he was already painting the streets and the people on the streets, and so he was a very good choice. He got 25 guineas for this painting. Now, the painting of Piccadilly Circus, which you might know, by Lowry, was sold at, I can't remember if it's Christie's or Sotheby's, actually, Christie's, I think, quite recently, and it was sold for 5 million. So you wouldn't get one for 25 guineas now. Even if you had 25 guineas, you wouldn't get one. He took 3 months to paint it. And the WAAC, the War Artists Advisory Committee, they exhibited lots of times, because there were lots of exhibitions around the country, including at the National Gallery, of the war artists' paintings, because they wanted people to kind of see what it was like in other cities, other towns. Right, have we got any more questions, Sharon?
Yeah, that was really interesting, thank you. Lorraine said, did he ever make money whilst he was alive?
He did, yes. He, unlike a lot of artists, he did, yeah, because the public liked his paintings. So his first exhibition was in the 30s in London, his first major exhibition, and that he sold well through that. And then after that, he did start selling paintings. I mean, it's extraordinary, really, because he was so retiring, so sort of, in some aspects, he was so backward and coming forward, so you can't imagine how he would ever have made it work. But I think his paintings were so distinctive that they were waiting to be found, really.
Yeah.
Have we got any more?
Yeah, Stevie wants to know if he painted landscapes outside the city.
Yes, he did. Later on, he paints these seascapes, which I mentioned before, and I haven't got any images of those actually, but they're really beautiful. If you're in Salford, if you're in the area, go to the Lowry Centre, and which is a big shopping centre and cinemas and restaurants, and I don't even know if it's open at the moment. I should imagine it probably is. And the Lowry, there's a permanent exhibition of Lowry's work, which is very interesting and shows lots of bits of film of him, shows lots of photographs of him, and lots and lots of the paintings. And you'll see there the kind of wide range. He lived through two wars, because he was born in 1887. So he lived through two wars. So he responded to both wars by painting the local area. Okay, we're just on time. Any more questions?
Just one from Ian. He asked if he did his work from photos.
No. As far as I know, he didn't take photographs. He may have done later, but I think all his work was based on drawings. He apparently would, pull out an envelope from his pocket, and if something struck him that he was interested in, he'd pull out an envelope and draw on the back of that. Classic artist behaviour, drawing on any old scrap of paper. Right, thank you. I've been lovely questions. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching, everyone. And I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to hand you back to Sharon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Al. That was amazing. It was really interesting. And thank you all to the viewers and for your questions and comments. There's resources on the description if you'd like more information. And could I please ask you to complete the feedback form? to continue to make Bravo 22 bigger and better. We'll be back on Bravo 22 Live next Tuesday at 11 a.m. for another high-profile In Conversation series with Matt Whiteman and Mick Carroll, and a celebrity guest to be announced tomorrow. On Thursday, the 30th, there'll be a drawing session led by Mark Woodhead and presented by Ian Rudge, and there are one or two spaces left on the workshop Is It Art on Wednesday the 29th. If you're interested, email Alice Palmer. Thanks everyone. Bye for now.